Now it's time for the traditional news from the OTP team. We start here with the community. As you know, there is an industrial user group, and they want to take care of the community. We want to grow the community, and we from Ericsson also want that. So the industrial user group, with the number of members, which we want to increase, they have instantiated this community manager. They are driving license change. They are trying to get an issue tracker up and running, and it will soon happen actually. I will not promise exactly which day, but within a month, I suppose. The packet manager has been a discussion. It was mentioned during the day, early in the morning perhaps, and it can be a good way of welcoming new beginners into the language. So we will strive for working with that until the next major release, so that or earlier, so that we can have a packet manager client inside the OTP distribution. So that the Erlang Central is also driven by the Erlang Industrial User Group, and that's up and running. Now about what we are focusing on at Ericsson for Erlang OTP. We are focusing on general system characteristics. We get new requirements from our customers all the time. It's generally about performance, scalability, and memory footprint. Some examples of what we will continue working on for the next release is then trappable BIFs. That is, if you feed a BIF with megabytes or gigabytes of input, you must trap this BIF in steps, so we cannot run to completion at once, because then you will block the schedulers. We have done that with many important BIFs, but we have some left to do. Garbage collection can always be improved, and we have some ideas about that. Multiple poll sets, it's a way of making I/O more parallel, taking advantage of the scheduler threads in a better way. We are driving a project together with the Swedish Institute for Computer Science with just-in-time compilation for Erlang. And virtualization running on a hypervisor. It gives some surprises when it comes to characteristics sometimes. It doesn't go as well as you could expect. Some system functions are much more expensive in that environment, so that we have to maybe find other solutions in the Erlang VM sometimes. For example, the timers. But I will talk more about that. Tracing, and also another area where we will work after this coming release. It's important to have good ways of identifying bottlenecks both in our own code and in the applications. Regarding the releases we have, today we have the OTP 17 track, and we usually plan one release per quarter. But occasionally we have to do patch releases earlier than planned. And you see the naming scheme here. 7.0, 7.1. I mean, this last number here, it indicates that it has some kind of functional lift in this release. Still compatible, but But if you have the third, like the last line here, which is the last patch we have given out, 17.5.6, then it's just a bug when we step the third figure here. But we have also now we have started to announce this properly at the open source list, so you get to know about these patches as well. But I mean, they are properly described, these patches. For example, it could concern only just one application, so you have no reason to step up maybe to that one if you're not using that application that we have patched. And it can be so that if we have planned 17.1 but have to give out the patch before that, we might have to take that name for the patch, and then the planned release will be named 17.2. Just so you understand how we reason here. But now the next release is planned for within 2 weeks, 18. And some highlights here is finally then the license change, which the purpose of this is to make it easier to use Erlang in certain companies which have very rigid rules about what licenses can be used. Otherwise, it's about the same level of permissions in these licenses. And we have already released 2 release candidates in this OTP 18. So you have had the opportunity to try it out. And we have got very valuable feedback as well. So now we are just working on the final small corrections, hopefully small. Other things in this release is the time system in Erlang. And this has been rewritten for many reasons. One was the scalability in a virtualized environment where it's much more expensive to ask for time, or it can be, at least in some of them. Another thing is that when you start Erlang and you haven't got contact with a time sync, for example an NTP server, you start with a very bad time, maybe 1970 something. And then Erlang adjusts its time slowly. So it will take years until we come up to the right time. But if we do it faster, then the timeouts will be inaccurate. So now we have invented something called time warp modes, where we can allow this time adjustment to get a hop in time, and we fix it later than the first startup. But you have to read about these 3 modes, time warp modes. There are new scalable time APIs, and Erlang now is deprecated. There's also a new lock-free reference creation, the last line here. And the background of that is that, as we have it now in 17, Erlang now, it is documented to return a unique new time. And because of that, we have to synchronize between all the scheduled threads before we can deliver this time. We have to check that we haven't delivered this time and step it up with 1 microsecond otherwise. This is not very good, and usually you just want the time and you don't care about its uniqueness. So then we have the Erlang timestamp in 18 instead, where you can get the time in the same format as in Erlang now, but without uniqueness guarantees. If you want uniqueness, you have to use the Erlang unique integer function instead. Yes. Other features, maps. Now we have support for big maps, meaning hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of keys, key value pairs. Previously it was possible to have many, but it didn't scale. We can also have variables as keys. It was not possible before. And from this release, we don't regard maps as experimental anymore. And that means that we have to keep the interfaces compatible. And I hope that will hold. Yes, other small things in this release. Non-blocking standard I/O. This could otherwise block the whole Erlang VM if you try to print something on standard I/O and standard I/O is not working or blocking, which it could be sometimes. If you do it through a pipe or something like that. Dialyzer, you can suppress warnings. We strive to that you can use dialyzer and get 0 warnings, but sometimes you have warnings in some modules that I know this, but I will not change because I don't think it's an error. Or I will not change it now, I accept these warnings now. Then you can change by providing an attribute inside the module. You can suppress warnings for certain functions or certain types of warnings. So put it inside the module. And then you get a silent, empty list of warnings from dialyzer. Hopefully. New ETS table, ETS functions, and these two, they are actually user contributed. It's ets_take, where you delete all entries corresponding to a certain key, and all these entries are also returned in a list, these objects. Another one is ets_update counter, where you can have a default value. So if this key which you try to update doesn't exist, you can create a default value. And you can have this default value as a macro, literal. Doesn't matter what key it is. It will get the right key. Yes, and then there's other small bug fixes. Quite a lot of other things, new features and bug fixes. And many of them are contributions from users. Then we have coming releases. And we continue with this goal of having about 1 release per quarter. And major releases once a year. So this is the very preliminary plan with 19 in about a year. And what are we working on then for this? As I mentioned before, we have certain focuses, and I repeat some of them here. Virtualization. If we run into problems with our customers, we have to find solutions there. I mean, Erlang runs very well in a virtualized environment, but could be some characteristics that isn't the best. Tracing. There is something called LTTNG, Linux Trace Tool Next Generation. It's only for Linux, but it corresponds to dtrace, could say. But as Linux is one of the most common target systems, it's quite interesting to use this, and it's an open source component, this too, and we have actually collaboration with the team making it. So we're trying to get in adaptations for Erlang. They support, I mean, the basic is to support C programming, but they support certain interfaces with Java as well. And now we try to have support for general support for dynamic languages. And if you have that integration, you can turn on tracing for I mean, the whole system consisting of both C programs, Java programs, Erlang programs, and you get all the traces in the same log, if you want. And the user of trace doesn't know that it's Erlang he's tracing. Distribution is another thing to work with. We need to be good at handling 100 nodes or more. And today we are not. You run into certain problems with the full connectivity between nodes sometimes and so on. Could also look at heterogeneous distribution where there could be different protocols between some nodes than to other nodes. Error logging is another thing to look into. Today, it's quite common that the error logging mechanism can put down the whole system because you get over flooded of memory consumption, or the performance goes down because of too heavy logging. So we have to find solutions for how to log faster, how to truncate things if it gets too big. And we know that there are other components out there in the open source world for logging, for example, Logger. But it gets into a problem that it is not the standard parts coming with OTP are not good enough, so to say. It can also be that the file system you're trying to log to is temporarily unavailable. That can of course not stop the node from running. But today you have a risk there. We will look also at build support for embedded and cross environments. That is not really the same as packet management. It's mostly building C code. crypto. In OpenSSL, there is an alternative API which is more efficient than the one we are using today, that we try to interface. And we'll also address the documentation, how we do it, how it looks like, so on. I will not promise that everything here is done, but it's on our agenda. Then we have the long-term plans. Continue with this Erlang just-in-time compilation. We'll do something about file and IO servers, because they are sometimes not so efficient. And related to the packet management is to think about how we can divide OTP into different parts. Maybe one basic package and additional packages which are optional, so to say. Yes, that's what we are thinking about. Any questions?
The LTTNG, is that going to be in 19 or is that just sometime after?
The plan for LTTNG is 19, yes. You can actually interface it quite easily right now also by writing a NIF. If you call that NIF, you can get the trace out in LTTNG. And it's used like that actually at Ericsson right now, in the product that Anders described, for example, in the other room here. Okay.
Is there a plan to include defines for the different versions? I noticed that I don't know if it's done in 17 now, but in 16 it wasn't. So there was quite a hack if you had to build for two different versions. You had to define it on some other level, for example, a rebar script. It would be really nice if the Erlang would come with a define for which version it is. So you could say, okay, if it's version 18 to this, if it's version 17 to that.
Okay, I wouldn't say that we have any explicit plans, but maybe we could get plans if you convince us.
I'll get my stick.
You mean like having the compiler predefining a macro that you can if-def around?
Pretty
or
much.
something?
Just have a R17.1 macro that you can use to say, okay, this is at least 17.1.
Could be. I won't promise it right now, but a good idea, perhaps.
What's the plan for dirty scheduling, which has been introduced recently?
Yes, that one is a tricky one. It's not implemented by us. So the current plan is that we keep it alive. So it's useful at the same level as today, but I'm not sure that we plan any deep work on this from our side right now.
It remains experimental.
Yes, yes. Okay. Are we starting with the next point in the agenda now then? Okay.